July 31st, 2021. It's Saturday in Cleveland, Ohio, an old industrial city that's reinvented itself as an attractive place to live.
Cleveland has that small town feel, despite it being an area where millions of people live.
Cleveland has one of the most vibrant lakefronts on the Great Lakes.
It's actually quite large and expansive, but there's something about Cleveland where you just feel like it's a small town.
The cost of living in the area is still reasonable, and it's a great place to raise a family.
Family is what brings Akua Avignon to Benny Washington's doorstep that afternoon. She's looking for her daughter, 18-year-old Adriana Barnes.
Benny is Adriana's boyfriend, and she stays with him sometimes.
And it has been more than 24 hours since Akua last heard from her daughter, which is unusual.
She talked to her every day.
Even if she doesn't want to talk, she'll text. So I still send mine, but I don't get one back. It didn't sit right because she's not going to not answer the text message back.
She had also tried to call Benny, but she couldn't reach him either.
He didn't have a phone that worked properly. It only worked on Wi-Fi. And so if you reached out, he might reach back if he's inside the house. But I got no reply.
Even more troubling for Adriana's mother is that today is her birthday.
She wouldn't have missed her mother's birthday.
Ever since she was little, it was her goal to make sure she was the first person to tell me happy birthday.
That's what really had her feeling that something was not right.
Concerned about her daughter, Akua had gone to Benny's apartment.
I went up and knocked on the door.
Hey, Miss Barnes, what can I do for you?
Is Adriana here?
The question appeared to take Benny by surprise.
I thought she was with you.
He was like, she left yesterday. She said it was your birthday, so she was coming home.
One of 5 siblings, family was always important to Adriana Barnes.
They were very, very close to whatever room she was in, they all were in together. That was the running joke. I didn't need more than 2 bedrooms because they would find their way together no matter what.
And as the oldest, she always had her mother's back.
If I told my little children, like, hey, you gotta clean your room, you gotta make your bed. If I walked away to go do something else, she made sure, like, hey, did you hear what Mom said?
That strong sense of discipline guided Adriana's plans for her future.
Even when she was in the 10th grade, she knew that she wanted to be in some part of the military.
Adriana was a young woman who had real goals and real dreams.
In fact, those dreams were practically in her DNA.
Part of my plans to go to the Marines, but then I had Adriana, so it wasn't something that I did. And then she did her own research and was like, yeah, this is something I might like. So I understood her decision to want to actually go into the military.
Okay, are you sure this is what you want to do?
I'm sure.
Hey, well, I'm proud of you then. Go for it, baby. I'm so happy for you.
She's a young woman thinking about her future.
It was very important for Adriana. Like, she put forth a very good effort. She had signed up for information.
As she neared graduation, she started talking with the local recruiting office.
But would a chance meeting at her part-time job threaten her carefully laid plans?
She met Benny through one of his cousins that she worked with.
I'm so glad your cousin introduced us.
He had his own place, and she still lived at home.
You saw her spending a lot more time over there. She would spend nights there.
This is a young girl that was excited about the relationship.
But even as the relationship turned serious, not everyone approved.
She was only 18 and he was 38.
Everybody had their opinions and we let her know. We had this conversation plenty of times where I told her it's not a good match.
But Adriana didn't care.
It's like, I'm 18 now, Ma. I can make my own life choices now.
Besides, the family figured the relationship wouldn't last.
She made the decision to go to the military.
Adriana was meeting regularly with Army recruiters.
In fact, Adriana had scheduled an appointment with the recruiter the day before her mom's birthday.
She was like, Ma, I'm just gonna go and go over there and meet with the recruiters and do what I gotta do, and then I'll be back.
But now, 24 hours after that meeting was supposed to have taken place, Adriana has disappeared.
Do you know if she made it to the recruiter's office?
She said she was headed over there before coming home.
He said she left yesterday with one of her friends.
You sure it wasn't the recruiter?
In order to make things as easy as possible on recruits, they will arrange for transportation to and from the interview.
Benny said that might be the case, but he wasn't sure.
I'd never seen a guy before.
Adriana Barnes had her future all planned out.
Ever since she was little, Adriana had dreamed of joining the military.
She was definitely a young woman who wanted to give herself a better position in life and was looking at the military to put herself in a better situation.
Not everybody wants to get out of school just to go back to school.
She'd been meeting with the local recruiting office about enlisting.
But now, after her most recent recruiting appointment, Adriana has disappeared.
Her boyfriend, Benny, said he last saw her when she left for the meeting.
Do you even know if the recruiter picked her up?
I'm not sure.
He didn't know. It was a million things that ran through my mind. Maybe she had gotten in an Uber and something happened.
All her mother knew for sure was that she hadn't heard from Adriana in over 24 hours.
She'd even missed her mother's birthday.
Akua had said that nowhere in the world she would miss my birthday.
Everybody was going to be together.
Okay.
They were looking forward to the dinner, and she was going to be there for her birthday.
Instead, Adriana's mom spends the next several hours desperately trying to find her daughter. But it's no use.
I think it was probably about 8:30, after there was no text back, no phone call, there was nothing. And I went to the police and made a report. And they had told me that they wouldn't take it because she was 18 and she's technically not in school anymore. And it hadn't been 48 hours. They weren't supposed to.
Why don't you give her some time? I'm sure she'll turn up.
He kept saying he doesn't feel she's in danger and she's 18, so.
You don't think she had second thoughts about joining the military, do you?
Well, I mean, there were some things she needed to do.
They had told her that she needed to drop about 50 pounds before boot camp started.
And if she changed her mind, she might be avoiding her family.
Adriana's mother swears that isn't the case.
I insisted, this is not like her, something is wrong. If you know her, you know social media is something that she's not gonna go without. She had no social media activity, and even if she was mad at me, this is not my daughter. She's not gonna walk away.
Eventually, her mother's persistence convinces the police.
He was like, I understand because I'm a parent too. And he was like, you know what, we're gonna take the report.
The detective also offered some advice on how to find Adriana.
He gave me some tips on how to get the last location of the phone because we were on a family plan.
But when Adriana's mom tries to locate her daughter's phone, she fails.
Her location's off.
It wouldn't go through because the phone had been turned off and the location had been unshared from everybody. So I couldn't get it.
Does this mean something happened to Adriana? Or did she deliberately turn it off because she didn't want to be found?
Adriana's mom is sure that isn't the case.
She really knew something wasn't right.
Keep trying, and if we learn anything, we'll reach out to you.
Determined to find Adriana, the following morning, Akua reaches out to the recruiter who had been working with her daughter.
I called and asked him if he knew Adriana.
Hello? Hi, this is Akua, Adriana Barnes' mom. Yes, you were supposed to meet with her yesterday.
The recruiter's response takes her completely by surprise.
I don't know her, and don't call his phone again.
And he told me he didn't know her and don't call his phone again, and hung up on me. It makes no sense that if I'm telling you, hey, I'm trying to get in touch with my daughter, you're one of the last people I see that she talked to. Have you seen her? Why would you curse me and then hang up on me?
Outraged, Adriana's mother calls the main office number and speaks to the recruiter's supervisor.
The excuse that I got for him being that rude to me was that he's a young guy, he just started.
Okay, I just want to know if my daughter made her appointment.
The supervisor said that according to their record, she did.
The interview occurred there. There was certain documentation that she needed to bring with her. So we know that she did have her ID and her social security card with her that day.
They had been copied and placed in her file.
But after that, she disappeared.
There was a lot of things running through my mind. Did the recruiter get her? You know, did he take her somewhere?
Adriana's mother passes what she learned on to the detectives and then seeks additional help in finding her daughter.
We have some great community activists here in Cleveland who will help families that are in these types of positions.
They'll contact me. I'll meet with them. I'll request a picture, age, description of what she had on when she went missing. And we brought the team down there and we started warning community searching.
They sent out a mass text stating that we had a missing young lady.
We are so adamant about trying to find missing females, especially Black females, because there's so many Black females missing.
But the longer Adriana is missing, the less likely she is to be found.
We had a sex trafficking ring and a human trafficking ring in our city.
You've got people grabbing up young ladies and then they disappear.
After Cleveland police open a missing persons investigation into the disappearance of 18-year-old Adriana Barnes, her mother launches her own search with the help of local activists.
There were concerns that Adriana could be a victim of sex trafficking.
Right now, a lot of young people are coming up missing. And we have different groups that are doing human trafficking right here in this city.
You got a whole bunch of this going on. Snatching up these young kids, snatching up young adults, young people, and putting them on drugs and things like that.
So that's where my mind kind of went, and we were kind of looking to see if there had been any recent busts with sex trafficking in Cleveland.
Adriana's mother and the activists also do their best to raise awareness.
Different organizations got involved with the Barnes family and were able to help them in creating awareness and bringing attention to what had happened.
We put up flyers all through the neighborhood.
We had search parties with numerous people.
Adriana's boyfriend, Benny Washington, joins the search effort at every opportunity.
If you see her, would you please call that number there?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
He called me every day or text me every day. Ma, just checking in, how you doing? Making sure you're okay. We not gonna give up. We gonna find her.
Benny and Adriana's mother also search his apartment, looking for any clues to where she might have gone.
I was looking for anything that belonged to her that was there, and I didn't see anything.
While they continue to search for clues, detectives follow up on Adriana's mother's concerns about the recruiter.
I don't really care for the recruiter because while she was missing, it was actually the recruiter that I had talked to that hung up on me.
I felt like it was suspicious, so I just instantly suspected him. I wanted to know his name. I wanted to talk to the recruiter myself, face to face, to see what he says.
He was someone that was not a part of their community, so it makes sense that they would feel suspicious about him.
Maybe he set her up and he helped somebody take her.
Maybe he got her out of town somewhere or whatever, because stuff like that happens.
Not that the detectives reveal any of that when they sit down with him.
We're investigating the disappearance of Adriana Barnes.
Okay, have a seat. I heard she gone missing, so if there's anything I can do to help.
Sure, we just need to ask you a few questions.
Just routine, really.
You always want to talk to the last person to see someone in any investigation and verify what they tell you.
So you gave Adriana a ride that day?
Yeah, we do that sort of thing all of the time.
The recruiter picked Adriana up from Benny Washington's apartment building, brought her out to Cleveland Heights where that interview was. And at the end of that meeting, she was then brought back to Benny Washington's apartment.
You drove her home?
Yeah, I dropped her off, but I didn't see her go in.
However, he does reveal that their meeting hadn't gone as well as Adriana had hoped.
She didn't bring all the documentation she needed with her.
She needed her high school diploma. That was an item that she didn't have with her.
Plus, there was the ongoing issue with the fitness requirements.
She wasn't gonna run. You know, it's just something you can't do in boot camp. You gotta run.
She's a good kid.
You sound like you care about her a lot.
What do you mean?
They were concerned about the nature of their relationship and how close they were to one another.
But the recruiter insists it wasn't like that at all.
It's part of the job. You get to know these kids.
She felt like he was a mentor. And when a young adult feels that connection to an adult that's doing what they see themselves doing in the future or what they dream to do, that can impact them in a way where they feel like they have a connection to somebody that they trust.
You got a person that you can confide in.
According to the recruiter, Adriana had done just that.
There's something you ought to know.
He said it's something Adriana had told him on the drive back to Benny's apartment.
She was telling me how she really needed to get out of town.
He claims that she'd expressed a strong desire to leave.
But it's her reason for leaving town that really raised a red flag for detectives.
She was explaining to me how she was sexually assaulted.
Cleveland detectives investigating Adriana Barnes' disappearance have just learned the 18-year-old may have been sexually assaulted.
The Army recruiter who'd been working with Adriana said she told him about it while he was dropping her off after their last meeting.
According to the recruiter, the attacker was a friend of Adriana's boyfriend, Benny Washington.
Did she tell you his name?
She didn't, but she did tell me that she filed a police report.
Could the alleged assault have something to do with Adriana's disappearance?
The detectives don't know for sure, but they are satisfied that the recruiter had nothing to do with it.
His supervisor confirmed that he had only been gone the half hour or so that it took to drive Adriana back to Benny's apartment and return to the recruiting office.
The recruiter dropped her off, returned to the office, and all of those things are verified.
Thank you for your time.
All right.
Back at the station, Detectives are also able to confirm that Adriana had filed a report for the alleged sexual assault.
The report gives detectives the attacker's identity.
His name is Wendell Dixon.
This individual was over to Benny's house and she had went to sleep on the couch. And she woke up to this individual with their hands down her pants.
For him to violate her in that way could be extremely traumatizing.
The police report detailed how Adriana fought off the attack.
She woke up and they began to fight.
What are you doing? Get off of me.
She had hit him in the mouth with a candle and knocked his teeth out.
Benny had rushed into the room, drawn by the commotion.
Benny later told me, yeah, I was gonna shoot him, but she grabbed my arm and said, you can't do that. It's people outside. It's kids outside.
Get out!
Instead, Adriana had called the police and made the report. But nothing ever came of it.
Wendell fled, and the police had been unable to locate him.
But now the detectives are wondering, had Wendell simply gone into hiding? Or had he been biding his time?
Maybe he did something to her in retaliation for her going and trying to press charges on him for what he did.
After uncovering the police report, the detectives launch a renewed effort to locate Wendell.
He shouldn't be on the street. He's a danger and he's a menace to society.
But they're still unable to locate Wendell.
Benny doesn't know where he is either.
And you don't know where Adriana is?
He said she got in the car with some recruiter.
Appreciate it.
But where she'd gone after the recruiter dropped her off outside the apartment remains a mystery.
She's a missing person. Do we know that there's even any wrongdoing at that point? That there's any foul play? It's hard to say.
Meanwhile, law enforcement moves on to other priorities.
They've only got so many resources.
Law enforcement is restricted by what they can and cannot do. That's the case in every investigation.
But Adriana's mother and her team of activists refuse to give up hope.
Me and Nakua would start talking every day and making plans to go out for the next day and who we was going to talk to and how we was going to do it.
Other activists would come to help. Some of extended family from my side would come and just put up the flyers, look, check the abandoned houses with us, a lot of things. Just looking for anything, any little thing.
We do the rough part. We go deep within the woods, around the water, and we look. But more so than anything, we pray and ask God for direction. And we allow the Spirit of God to lead us in a direction that we believe He wants us to go.
But weeks turn into months with no new leads.
It was 8 months that went by. That whole summer, winter.
It had to be really challenging for Akua to remain hopeful.
We hope against hope. When we out here looking, maybe she just ran away.
But Adriana hadn't run away. It's March 17th, 2022, almost 8 months after Adriana's disappearance, when the property manager lets herself into Benny's old apartment.
Benny and his new girlfriend, Marquetta Wallace, had been evicted on March 11th.
The way the eviction process works in the city of Cleveland is some bailiffs from the housing court go to the property. Once they gain access, they have a company that comes in and moves out anyone's personal items. Personal property, meaning clothing, belongings, furniture.
The people who do evictions don't evict trash, so they left it up there.
And exactly a week later, the building manager went in to clean out the apartment.
But it turns out that Benny left more than trash behind.
This is Cleveland Police. I was supposed to clean this apartment today because they got evicted a couple days ago, and there's something on the porch.
It's a dead body.
The manager of a Cleveland apartment building called 911 to report finding a dead body on the balcony of a recently vacated apartment.
Is it a male or a female? I don't know. I can't tell.
The body was decomposed beyond recognition.
Little flesh was still on the bone. The decomposition, it was unbelievable.
Despite that, the apartment manager is sure she knows the identity of the deceased.
It's gotta be Adriana.
Adriana Barnes' boyfriend, Benny Washington, had lived in the apartment until recently.
They just evicted him.
And the last time anyone had seen Adriana was outside Benny's apartment.
She was dropped off at her boyfriend's apartment, Benny Washington, and her mother reported her missing the following day because she hadn't heard from her.
Has the mystery finally been solved?
Don't touch anything else. That's not going to be evidence. And the police will come out and they're going to have people to handle it. Okay? And present the evidence. Okay? Okay.
When homicide detectives arrive at the scene, they assume that the body on the balcony is Adriana.
We were pretty confident, once Adriana's body was discovered, that the date of her death was on or about July 30th or 31st, because she absolutely would have been in contact with her mother if she was still alive.
It's just horrible to think about the length of time in which her body was on that balcony.
It was close to 8 months after her disappearance.
Confirming that the body is Adriana will require an autopsy. But first, the coroner's office faces the grim task of removing the body.
She was wrapped extensively. If you think of, a mummification and how those bodies are wrapped and wrapped and wrapped in layers, that is how her remains were. They were wrapped in numerous layers of clothing. There were blankets, plastic shopping bags, plastic garbage bags, and then there was like a yoga mat on top of her.
And it's clear that she had been on the balcony for quite some time.
There was a large stain on this balcony underneath where her body had been that was caused by decomposition fluid. That tells you this body was there for a very long period of time, that it decomposed at that location. It wasn't moved there in the days from the eviction to when she was discovered. That this activity all happened right there where it was found.
Word that Adriana may have finally been found spreads quickly.
I got a beat to my phone, and that's when I saw the police pulling the body.
One of the activists had called me and told me that it was all over Instagram that they had found a body at his apartment. And all I could do was cry because I didn't find her.
While Adriana's friends and family grieve, the hunt for her boyfriend, Benny Washington, begins.
The fact that she's found on the balcony of his apartment, he's absolutely suspect number one.
When detectives pulled Benny's rap sheet, they discovered he had an extensive criminal record.
He had been convicted of a prior felony offense of violence.
He's a prey on women and children, the habitual sex offender.
He was convicted and went to jail for child molestation. He's a pedophile.
He was chased out of the neighborhood that he grew up in because of the weird stuff he was doing.
He also had a pending arson charge.
He was somewhat of a psychopath.
But his file doesn't give them any indication to where Benny might be now.
After my daughter was discovered, they flooded the neighborhood with police looking for him.
The detectives also attempt to locate Benny's new girlfriend, Marquetta Wallace.
She didn't come into the picture with Benny until a little bit after Adriana went missing, but certainly had knowledge that she was on that balcony.
Ain't no way possible you could have been in that apartment with that body decomposed like that on that porch. No way possible. And then them days, it was 80 degrees, 90 degrees. Come on, man.
We were interested and prosecuted her because of that knowledge and her failure to come forward and disclose that information.
However, Marquetta does eventually come forward.
After police recover Adriana's body, Marquetta comes down to the station to speak with detectives.
She claims to have vital information.
She knows where they can find Benny.
And when the detectives rush to the location she gave them, it appears she was telling the truth.
He was actually there. They saw him there.
But now that they've found him, the detectives still have to catch him.
When they went to approach him, he ran.
Police investigating the murder of Adriana Barnes have tracked down the man they believe is responsible, her boyfriend, Benny Washington.
But when they approached him, he ran.
He's kind of leading the police on a wild goose chase around the neighborhood.
They had to chase him through people's houses and everything.
But eventually the police managed to run Benny down and place him under arrest for murder.
When I found out about the arrest, I felt relieved because it was beating her mother up inside, not knowing what happened to her daughter.
Not that Benny is willing to give the detectives any details once they have him in custody.
Benny did not want to talk. He said he did not like the police and asked for an attorney.
Benny was certainly within his rights.
Although when the detectives sit back down with Benny's new girlfriend, Marquetta Wallace, she is more than willing to give them her side of the story.
Most of all, she wanted police to know that she had nothing to do with Adriana's death.
So, how'd you meet Benny?
I met Benny when he was handing out flyers about her.
My name is Benny.
Yeah.
We're looking for my girl. What's your name?
Marquetta.
Marquetta. It's nice to meet you, Marquetta.
Nice to meet you.
If you see her, can you call that number there?
Even though she was quote-unquote cooperative and was willing to sit down with the police, she didn't admit or really implicate Benny all that much.
And you didn't know the body was on the balcony?
I had no idea that the body was on the balcony.
The detectives have their doubts.
Even though she would give us nuggets of information that might be helpful, a lot of what else she said didn't really seem to be truthful.
No, I didn't know.
And it's hard to believe that she had lived in Benny's apartment for several months and never noticed what was on the balcony.
Stand up. You're under arrest.
At the end of the interview, the detectives place Marquetta under arrest.
She was charged with gross abuse of a corpse. It's a felony of the 5th degree.
And when the autopsy confirms that the body on Benny's balcony is Adriana, the prosecutors charge him with aggravated murder.
Adriana's cause of death was a single gunshot wound to her head.
Will that be enough to secure a conviction when the case goes to trial in May of 2023?
The biggest hurdle, I think, in trying this case is when two people are alone, you know, what happened leading up to this murder. Because I didn't have someone who can say he planned it out.
Instead, they argue that Benny was jealous about Adriana's meeting with the Army recruiter.
Babe, everything went so good today.
You laughing? You smiling? How good did it go?
It went really good. What do you mean?
You trying to replace me?
What?
When Adriana returned to Benny's apartment that day, they had an argument.
You trying to replace me?
Nobody replacing you. You sound insecure.
You've been sleeping around. I know you've been sleeping around.
You talking crazy. He just gave me a ride.
Gave you a ride, all right. How many times y'all been together?
We don't necessarily know exactly what led up to the shooting. We know that she shot.
You sound stupid.
I'll show you how stupid.
One thing can escalate to another, and then you got a homicide.
Once Adriana was dead, Benny dragged her body onto the balcony and left her there.
She went in that building and didn't come back out.
Will that be enough to secure a conviction? The prosecutors wrap up their case without putting Benny's new girlfriend Marquetta on the stand.
She was too much of a risk to utilize as a witness at trial against Benny.
Not that it matters in the end.
When the verdict was read in court, he was found guilty of murder with a number of firearm specifications as well, felonious assault, abuse of a corpse, having a weapon under disability, and he was also found to be a repeat violent offender.
The guilty verdict makes little impression on Benny.
He ain't showed no emotion, no nothing. It was like another day.
He was just sitting there with such a nonchalant demeanor, like he had no care in the world, no emotion, no character, no nothing. He just sitting there, numb.
He didn't even flinch when the judge handed down his sentence.
He was sentenced to life in prison with parole eligibility for the first time after serving 38 years. So he's going away for a very long time.
Although no amount of time is enough to satisfy Adriana's family and friends.
I don't feel justice was served. He actually should have had the death penalty. And that's how I feel about it. Because you still have a chance to go up for parole.
Just the fact to hear the word possibility of parole, it'll make you feel easy because Adriana doesn't have a possibility of living no more.
Being a believer, a Christian, I have to, have a forgiving heart. But sometimes it's hard. If it's my child, I would want him dead too.
Benny's girlfriend, Marquetta Wallace, escapes prison altogether.
She pleaded no contest to abusing a corpse.
She received a nominal sentence for that, unsupervised probation.
I was very angry because the judge was like, oh, I feel like Benny took advantage of her too. No, he did not. She knew. She willingly lived in that apartment knowing what he did to her and where she was.
And whether justice was served or not, Adriana's family is paying the price for what Benny did to her.
It broke my family. She's the missing piece. From birthdays to outings. It's never been the same without her. Everything that we do together just don't seem right because she's the missing piece.
Adriana was a bright, intelligent person who would not have fallen off the map.
She wasn't a bad girl. She wasn't out here drinking and running the streets and partying and just seeking man and laying up. No, that was not her.
She had heart of gold. And it's sad that she didn't get the opportunity to grow and mature into it. And to show what else that she could do and what potential she had to get a world that was taken from her.
On the afternoon of May 17, 2001, the Arizona sun hung high above Phoenix, washing the city in the harsh white light that arrives just before summer fully takes hold. At Paradise Valley High School, students poured through hallways with the restless excitement that comes only on the final day of the school year. Lockers slammed shut one last time. Friends promised to meet over the summer. Teachers gathered stacks of papers already forgotten by the teenagers rushing toward freedom. Among those students was 17-year-old Alyssa Marie Turney. For everyone who saw her that day, there was nothing extraordinary about the afternoon. No one knew they were witnessing the last confirmed moments of her life in public. No one imagined that more than 2 decades later investigators, journalists, podcasters, and thousands of strangers across the country would still be asking the same haunting question. Where did Alyssa Turney go? Some missing person cases begin with violence. Others begin with panic. This one began with something far quieter. A teenage girl left school early with her stepfather. According to his account, they argued over lunch before returning home. Hours later, she was gone. There was no scream. No emergency call. No eyewitness describing an attack. No blood-stained room. No abandoned vehicle. Only silence. Silence has a way of expanding over time. At first it fills a house. Then it stretches across neighborhoods. Eventually it reaches police files stacked on dusty shelves, courtrooms filled with unanswered questions, and families forced to measure their lives not by birthdays or holidays, but by the number of years since someone disappeared. Alyssa's silence has lasted more than 25 years. Her body has never been found. No one has ever been convicted in connection with her disappearance. Legally, the case remains one of a missing young woman whose fate has never been conclusively established. Yet that legal reality has never erased the questions. Instead, each passing year seemed to create new ones. What really happened after Alyssa left school that afternoon? Did she truly decide to walk away from everything she knew? Was the note left behind genuine? Or did something happen inside a quiet suburban home that forever changed the lives of everyone connected to it? The answers have remained painfully out of reach. As investigators revisited the evidence over the years, the story became stranger rather than clearer. A controlling household. Thousands of pages of personal records. Hidden surveillance. Recorded telephone calls. Homemade explosive devices discovered years later during a search of the family home. A criminal case unlike almost any other, built without a body, without forensic evidence proving death, and without the certainty investigators desperately wished they possessed. Every revelation seemed to deepen the mystery instead of solving it. For Alyssa's younger sister, Sarah, the journey became even more personal. As a child, she believed the explanation she had always been given. Her sister had simply run away. Years later, after reading investigative files and confronting details she had never known, that certainty began to unravel. The search for Alyssa transformed from a police investigation into a family's lifelong mission. It also became a lesson in how memory changes over time. People remember conversations differently. Small details become significant decades later. Ordinary afternoons are replayed again and again until every minute feels impossibly important. The last day of school in May 2001 became one of those afternoons. Investigators reconstructed timelines. Witnesses searched their memories. Former classmates revisited moments they had never expected to matter. Every recollection carried hope that one overlooked detail might finally unlock the truth. But memory is fragile. The longer time passes, the more difficult certainty becomes. In true crime, audiences often expect a familiar structure. A crime occurs. Detectives gather evidence. A suspect is identified. Justice follows. The disappearance of Alyssa Turney refuses to fit that pattern. Instead, it forces uncomfortable questions about what justice means when certainty remains elusive. How do investigators prove a murder when no body has ever been recovered? How much weight should suspicious behavior carry in the absence of physical evidence? Can decades of circumstantial facts ever replace one undeniable piece of forensic proof? And perhaps the most difficult question of all. What happens when the legal system reaches the end of what it can prove, while loved ones continue searching for answers. Those questions would eventually echo inside courtrooms. They would divide public opinion. They would inspire documentaries, podcasts, investigative reports, and renewed public interest. But none of that existed on May 17, 2001. That afternoon was still ordinary. Cars rolled through familiar streets. Families planned summer vacations. Graduates celebrated the end of another school year. Phoenix moved forward without realizing one of its most enduring mysteries had already begun. Cases involving missing teenagers often attract immediate attention. Friends organize searches. Neighborhoods distribute flyers. Television stations interrupt programming. Yet not every disappearance unfolds the same way. Sometimes assumptions made during the first few hours shape an investigation for years. When authorities initially believe a teenager has voluntarily left home, precious opportunities can disappear along with time itself. Whether those early assumptions affected the search for Alyssa has remained a subject of discussion ever since. Looking back, investigators would later examine every decision made during those first critical days. Every phone call. Every interview. Every timeline. Every report. Every overlooked possibility. But hindsight is a luxury unavailable to detectives standing at the beginning of a case. They can only work with what appears to be true at the time. And in May 2001, the picture appeared deceptively simple. A 17-year-old girl. A note suggesting she had chosen to leave. No obvious signs of violence. No immediate evidence of foul play. Yet beneath that apparently straightforward narrative lay a family dynamic that investigators would later scrutinize in extraordinary detail. Accounts from relatives and friends described a household governed by strict control. As years passed, allegations emerged of constant monitoring, restrictions on personal relationships, and extensive surveillance inside the home. Those descriptions would become central to later investigations. At the same time, they would also remain fiercely contested within legal proceedings, where suspicion alone could never substitute for proof beyond a reasonable doubt. That distinction matters. Throughout this story, there is an important difference between what has been established, what has been alleged, and what has never been proven. The disappearance of Alyssa Turney exists in the space between those categories. It is a case built as much on unanswered questions as on confirmed facts. Perhaps that is why it continues to resonate with so many people. Human beings are naturally drawn toward mysteries because our minds resist unfinished stories. We want endings. We want certainty. We want to believe every victim is eventually found, every question answered, every family given peace. Reality is often far less generous. Some stories simply stop. Not because they have ended, but because the truth remains hidden somewhere beyond the reach of investigators, journalists, courts, and time itself. Somewhere in that unknown space exists the answer to what happened after Alyssa Turney left school on that warm afternoon in Phoenix. Whether that answer will ever be discovered remains uncertain. Until then, her photograph continues to appear on missing person posters. Her name continues to be spoken by investigators who refuse to close the file. Her sister continues to ask the public not to forget. And one ordinary Thursday in May continues to cast a shadow across more than 2 decades of unanswered questions. This is not simply the story of a missing teenager. It is the story of a family fractured by loss, an investigation that evolved over decades, a courtroom where suspicion collided with the limits of evidence, and a mystery that has never truly reached its ending. To understand how one ordinary school day became one of Arizona's most enduring missing person cases, we have to return to the beginning, long before the disappearance itself, and step inside the world Alyssa Turney called home. Phoenix, Arizona, has a way of making first impressions that stay with you. The city stretches across the Sonoran Desert beneath an enormous sky, where sunlight seems to linger for hours and summer temperatures can push life indoors. Palm trees line broad avenues, mountains frame the horizon, and neighborhoods blend together in a patchwork of quiet suburban streets. To many families, it is a place associated with opportunity, growth, and stability. By the beginning of the 21st century, Phoenix had become one of the fastest-growing cities in the United States, attracting people from across the country who were searching for a new start. In the spring of 2001, life in Phoenix appeared ordinary on the surface. Schools prepared for the final days of the academic year. Families planned summer vacations. Teenagers counted down the hours until classes would end, looking forward to months of freedom before returning in the fall. It was a familiar rhythm that repeated itself every year, giving the impression that nothing truly unexpected could happen in neighborhoods where children rode bicycles through cul-de-sacs and neighbors greeted one another from across freshly cut lawns. The Turney household stood within that seemingly ordinary world. From the outside, there was little to distinguish it from countless other suburban homes. It was not a place that attracted public attention. There were no flashing warning signs visible from the street, no indication that years later investigators would spend countless hours examining what happened inside its walls. Like so many homes that later become part of criminal investigations, it appeared unremarkable to those passing by. Inside the house lived 17-year-old Alyssa Marie Turney, her younger sister Sarah, and their stepfather, Michael Turney. To understand why Alyssa's disappearance would later become one of Arizona's most discussed missing person cases, it is important to understand the family itself, while recognizing the distinction between established facts and later allegations. Alyssa's early childhood had already been marked by profound loss. Her biological mother died from cancer while Alyssa was still young. Losing a parent during childhood changes the course of a person's life in ways that are difficult to measure. It creates questions that often remain unanswered and leaves emotional spaces that cannot easily be filled. After her mother's death, Michael Turney legally adopted Alyssa, becoming both her adoptive father and the primary parental figure in her life. For years, the family attempted to move forward. Like many households, they experienced routines that revolved around work, school, meals, and everyday responsibilities. To outsiders, there was little reason to believe they were anything other than another family navigating the ordinary challenges of raising teenagers. Yet as investigators later interviewed relatives, friends, classmates, and acquaintances, a more complicated picture began to emerge. Several people described Michael Turney as unusually controlling. According to witness accounts gathered during the investigation, he closely monitored many aspects of Alyssa's daily life. Friends later reported that she often faced restrictions uncommon among teenagers her age. These accounts would eventually become significant because they offered investigators a broader understanding of the family environment leading up to her disappearance. Among the allegations that surfaced were claims that Michael recorded telephone conversations, installed surveillance cameras within the home, monitored Alyssa's relationships, and required her to follow written rules governing her behavior. These descriptions were presented during later investigations and legal proceedings as part of the prosecution's broader theory about the household dynamic. At the same time, they were not, by themselves, proof that a crime had occurred. This distinction would remain central throughout the case. Behavior that appears unusual or controlling may raise suspicion, but suspicion alone does not establish criminal responsibility. Even so, those descriptions shaped the way investigators revisited the events of May 2001 years later. Friends who knew Alyssa remembered her as a typical teenager preparing for adulthood. Like many 17-year-olds, she was approaching an important transition in life. Graduation was drawing closer. Independence seemed increasingly within reach. Young people at that age often begin imagining futures beyond the homes where they were raised. College, work, friendships, and relationships gradually become larger parts of daily life. That natural desire for independence can sometimes create conflict within families. Disagreements over curfews, dating, responsibilities, or future plans are hardly unusual. Nearly every household experiences moments when parents and teenagers struggle to balance protection with growing independence. Investigators would later consider whether the tensions described by witnesses represented ordinary family disagreements or something more significant. The answer has never been conclusively established. Another important figure in this story was Alyssa's younger sister, Sarah Turney. At the time of Alyssa's disappearance, Sarah was still a child. Like many younger siblings, her understanding of family events depended largely on what adults around her chose to share. Children often accept explanations offered by parents because they have little reason to question them. Only much later, after becoming an adult, did Sarah begin examining the case independently. Her journey would eventually become one of the defining aspects of this story, but in the spring of 2001, she was simply a younger sister living in the same household, unaware that her family was approaching a moment that would permanently alter their lives. Looking back, it is tempting to search for obvious warning signs. People naturally ask whether someone noticed unusual behavior or sensed that something terrible was about to happen. In reality, life rarely provides such clarity. Families continue eating dinner. Students continue attending school. Neighbors continue mowing their lawns. The ordinary routine of daily life often continues uninterrupted until, suddenly, it does not. The Turney household appears to have been no different in that respect. There is no verified evidence suggesting that classmates at school believed Alyssa would soon disappear. There is no indication that teachers recognized an immediate crisis on the final day they saw her. The available evidence suggests that, to most people around her, May 17th began like any other school day. That normality is one of the reasons the case continues to resonate. Many of the most enduring missing person cases begin not with dramatic moments, but with ordinary ones. A student leaves class. Someone finishes work. A person runs an everyday errand and simply never returns. The contrast between routine and disappearance creates a lasting sense of unease. As years passed, investigators revisited every aspect of Alyssa's environment. They reviewed witness statements. They examined timelines. They studied family relationships. They searched for inconsistencies that might reveal what happened after she left school that afternoon. Those efforts reflected an understanding shared by experienced investigators. Context matters. The final hours before a disappearance cannot be fully understood without understanding the weeks, months, and years that came before them. Yet context alone rarely solves a case. It can explain relationships. It can identify possible motives. It can reveal patterns of behavior. But it cannot replace physical evidence. The absence of physical evidence would ultimately define nearly every stage of the Alyssa Turney investigation. Without a body, investigators faced extraordinary challenges. Without a confirmed crime scene, forensic opportunities were limited. Without direct evidence establishing exactly what happened after Alyssa returned home, every conclusion required careful examination. That difficulty would remain long after detectives first opened the case file. Years later, prosecutors would attempt to convince a jury that the available circumstantial evidence pointed toward homicide. Defense attorneys would argue that suspicion could never substitute for proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The courtroom battle that followed reflected one of the most difficult realities in criminal justice. Some cases leave investigators deeply convinced that a crime occurred while still leaving the legal system unable to prove exactly how or by whom. Long before those legal arguments unfolded, however, everything still rested on one seemingly ordinary Thursday. The final day of school. A teenager preparing for summer. A family following what appeared to be its normal routine. And a sequence of events that, within a matter of hours, would transform an ordinary suburban home into the center of one of Arizona's most enduring mysteries. The timeline of that day would later be reconstructed minute by minute, with investigators trying to determine where certainty ended and unanswered questions began. It is that timeline, and the last confirmed movements of Alyssa Marie Turney, that forms the next chapter of this story. At the center of every missing person investigation is a name that slowly risks becoming overshadowed by evidence, timelines, court documents, and public debate. As years pass, conversations often shift toward suspects, legal theories, and unanswered questions. Yet before there were investigators studying reports or attorneys arguing over evidence, there was simply a young woman whose future had barely begun. Her name was Alyssa Marie Turney. She was 17 years old. Like countless teenagers nearing adulthood, Alyssa stood at the uncertain intersection between childhood and independence. She was old enough to imagine a life beyond high school but still young enough to depend on the adults responsible for her care. It was an age filled with contradictions. Teenagers often crave freedom while still needing guidance. They begin making plans for the future while continuing to navigate the expectations of home. Friends and classmates remembered Alyssa as someone who blended naturally into everyday school life. She attended Paradise Valley High School in Phoenix, where the routines of classes, assignments, friendships, and extracurricular activities shaped the rhythm of her days. To the people who saw her in the hallways, she was not a future headline. She was another student preparing for the end of another school year. The final weeks of high school before summer vacation are often remembered as some of the most carefree moments in adolescence. Lockers begin to empty. Teachers finish grading final assignments. Conversations become less about homework and more about summer plans. Students discuss jobs, vacations, graduation, and the excitement of having a few months free from the structure of daily classes. Alyssa was living through those same ordinary moments. Nothing in the public record suggests that her classmates believed they were saying goodbye forever. There is no verified evidence that teachers viewed her final day at school as anything other than the conclusion of another academic year. Like so many disappearances, the significance of those last ordinary moments became apparent only in hindsight. Looking back decades later, investigators attempted to reconstruct not only where Alyssa went, but who she was as a person. That distinction matters. A missing person investigation is not simply an effort to establish a timeline. It is also an attempt to understand the life that existed before someone disappeared. The choices a person made, the relationships they valued, and the goals they pursued can all help investigators determine whether later events fit established patterns or stand in sharp contrast to them. One of the questions that emerged early in the investigation concerned whether Alyssa had voluntarily left home. Initially, law enforcement considered that possibility because of a handwritten note reportedly found in her bedroom suggesting that she intended to leave for California. At first glance, such a note appeared consistent with the idea of a teenager choosing to run away. But investigators soon began comparing that explanation with other known facts. If someone plans to leave home voluntarily, what do they normally take with them? Money. Transportation. Personal belongings. Items necessary to begin a new life. As investigators reviewed the circumstances surrounding Alyssa's disappearance, they found several details that appeared inconsistent with a carefully planned departure. According to investigative records, approximately $1,800 remained in her bank account. Her vehicle was left behind. Her telephone, personal belongings, cosmetics, and other everyday items also remained at home. Friends reported that they did not hear from her after she disappeared. None of those facts, standing alone, proved that foul play had occurred. People leave home under many different circumstances. Some leave impulsively. Some intentionally abandon possessions. Some disappear for reasons investigators never fully understand. Yet detectives believed these details deserved careful examination because they did not neatly align with the initial assumption that Alyssa had simply chosen to start over somewhere else. Understanding Alyssa also meant understanding the relationships surrounding her life. Over time, investigators interviewed friends, relatives, classmates, and others who had known her. Those interviews painted a picture of a teenager whose home environment was more complicated than it may have appeared from the outside. Several witnesses described restrictions placed upon her by Michael Turney, her adoptive father and stepfather. Accounts gathered during the investigation alleged that he exercised an unusually high degree of control over aspects of her daily life, including monitoring her activities and relationships. Friends later told investigators that Alyssa had expressed discomfort about that level of supervision. These witness statements became important because they provided investigators with additional context when evaluating the events leading up to her disappearance. At the same time, it is important to recognize that witness recollections are one component of an investigation and must be considered alongside all available evidence. As years passed, public discussion increasingly focused on the family dynamic. But amid those discussions, another reality remained easy to overlook. Alyssa herself could no longer speak. Every description of her personality came through someone else's memory. Friends remembered conversations. Family members recalled moments from childhood. Investigators pieced together impressions from interviews conducted months or even years after her disappearance. Memory is invaluable in investigations, but it is also imperfect. People remember the same events differently. Time changes perspective. New information influences how earlier experiences are interpreted. That reality complicated nearly every attempt to reconstruct Alyssa's life. What remained undisputed was that she had experienced significant loss at an early age. The death of her biological mother from cancer fundamentally altered the course of her childhood. Losing a parent during formative years often reshapes family structures and emotional relationships in ways that cannot easily be measured. After her mother's death, Michael Turney became the central parental figure in her life through legal adoption. Whether that relationship evolved into something healthy or deeply troubled became one of the central questions investigators later examined. It would also become one of the most debated aspects of the entire case. For the public, stories involving teenagers often carry a particular emotional weight because they represent futures interrupted. At 17, most people are still imagining the lives they hope to build. Some dream of college. Others hope to begin careers. Many simply look forward to greater independence. Those possibilities make disappearances especially painful because every unanswered question also represents a future that never had the opportunity to unfold. Had Alyssa remained safe, she would likely have celebrated countless milestones in the years that followed. Birthdays, graduations, careers, relationships, perhaps a family of her own. Instead, time seemed to stop. While the world continued moving forward, photographs of Alyssa remained permanently fixed in adolescence. Every missing person poster, every news report, every age-progressed image served as a reminder that investigators still did not know what had become of the 17-year-old last seen in May 2001. For her younger sister Sarah, that uncertainty became deeply personal. As a child, Sarah accepted the explanation that Alyssa had run away. Children often trust the narratives provided by the adults responsible for raising them. It was only years later, after reviewing investigative materials herself, that Sarah began questioning the version of events she had long believed. Her decision to publicly advocate for renewed attention to the case would eventually transform national awareness of Alyssa's disappearance. Through interviews, social media, podcasts, and public outreach, Sarah encouraged people not simply to remember the mystery, but to remember the person at the center of it. That distinction is important. True crime investigations often become dominated by discussions of suspects and evidence. Families, however, rarely want their loved ones remembered only for the circumstances of their disappearance. They want people to remember birthdays instead of court dates, dreams instead of legal filings, lives instead of mysteries. Those goals are difficult to achieve in cases that remain unsolved. Every new development tends to redirect public attention toward investigative theories rather than the individual who disappeared. Yet Alyssa's story cannot be understood without first recognizing that she was more than a case file. She was a daughter, a sister, a student, a friend. Someone whose absence left unanswered questions that have persisted for more than 2 decades. As investigators reconstructed her final known movements, one date became the focal point of every interview and every report. May 17, 2001. The last confirmed day anyone outside her family saw Alyssa alive. It began like an ordinary school day. By the end of the afternoon, she had vanished without a trace. Everything that followed, the handwritten note, the early assumption that she had run away, the years of investigation, the renewed scrutiny of her home life, the eventual criminal prosecution, and the courtroom proceedings decades later, would all trace back to the events of those few critical hours. Understanding exactly what happened during that final day would become the central objective of investigators for years to come. The timeline they assembled appeared straightforward at first. But with every closer examination, new uncertainties emerged, turning one ordinary Thursday into the beginning of a mystery that remains unresolved to this day. May the 17th, 2001, began as an ordinary Thursday in Phoenix, Arizona. The school year was drawing to a close, and for students at Paradise Valley High School, the atmosphere reflected the anticipation that always accompanies the final day of classes. Hallways were filled with conversations about summer plans. Lockers were being emptied. Teachers wrapped up final assignments while students counted down the hours until the bell would signal the beginning of vacation. Among those students was 17-year-old Alyssa Marie Turney. Nothing in the available records suggests that classmates or teachers noticed anything unusual about her that morning. There were no publicly documented reports of distress, no confirmed indication that she expected this day to be any different from the many school days that had come before it. Like countless teenagers across the country, she attended school expecting to return home later that afternoon. That expectation would never be fulfilled in any way investigators could later verify. The timeline that has emerged over the years is based on witness accounts, investigative records, and statements provided during the course of the investigation. While many aspects of that timeline are generally accepted, the critical hours after Alyssa left school remain the subject of uncertainty. One of the few established facts is that Michael Turney arrived at Paradise Valley High School before the normal end of the school day to pick Alyssa up early. According to Michael's account, he signed her out of school and the two left together. This would become the last confirmed public sighting of Alyssa. From that moment forward, the investigation would depend largely on reconstructing events that occurred away from public view. Michael later told investigators that after leaving school, he and Alyssa went to lunch together. During that outing, he said they argued. The precise subject of the disagreement has never been established through independent evidence available to the public. Family disagreements between parents and teenagers are common, and an argument alone would not necessarily have attracted attention had nothing else occurred. According to Michael's account, after lunch they returned home. What happened after that is where certainty begins to dissolve. Michael stated that he later left the house to pick up Sarah and attend to other matters. He reported that when he returned later in the day, Alyssa was gone. She was nowhere inside the house. Instead, according to his account, he discovered a handwritten note. The note reportedly stated that Alyssa could no longer live under the conditions at home and intended to leave for California. At first glance, the note appeared to offer a straightforward explanation. Teenagers sometimes run away. Family conflicts can escalate. Some young people leave home believing they will find greater freedom elsewhere. For investigators receiving an initial report, the existence of such a note naturally influenced the direction of the early inquiry. Yet investigations often evolve as additional information emerges. What initially appears simple can become increasingly complicated once detectives begin examining surrounding circumstances. As officers gathered information, they started asking practical questions. If Alyssa had voluntarily decided to leave home, how had she planned to support herself? Where had she gone? Who knew about her plans? Did she arrange transportation? Did she contact friends after leaving? These questions gradually exposed inconsistencies that investigators found difficult to reconcile. According to investigative records, Alyssa's personal belongings remained largely untouched. Her vehicle had not disappeared with her. Her bank account still contained approximately $1,800. Items that many people would consider essential for beginning a new life, including personal effects and everyday necessities, were reportedly left behind. Investigators also learned that friends had not heard from her after she disappeared. No confirmed communication surfaced indicating that she had safely reached another destination. None of these facts conclusively disproved the possibility that she had left voluntarily. Individuals who choose to disappear sometimes abandon possessions and intentionally sever communication. Nevertheless, detectives recognized that the available evidence did not neatly fit the initial assumption of a planned departure. As days became weeks, concern continued to grow. Missing person investigations often rely on the earliest hours after someone vanishes. Witnesses' memories are freshest. Surveillance footage, where available, is more likely to exist. Physical evidence has had less opportunity to disappear. Time, unfortunately, works against investigators. Every day that passes reduces opportunities to recover evidence or identify witnesses who may have observed something important. In Alyssa's case, the early focus on the possibility that she had run away would later become a subject of public discussion. Critics questioned whether the investigation might have unfolded differently had foul play been considered more aggressively from the outset. Others noted that investigators must make decisions based on the information available at the time rather than knowledge gained years later. Both perspectives reflect a difficult reality of missing person investigations. Law enforcement officers cannot assume every disappearance is a homicide. Nor can they ignore evidence suggesting voluntary absence. Balancing those possibilities is one of the greatest challenges investigators face. As detectives interviewed those closest to Alyssa, they sought to determine whether anyone else had knowledge of plans to leave Phoenix. Friends were asked whether she had discussed running away. Family members were interviewed about recent events. Investigators attempted to identify any destination she might have chosen if she had indeed left voluntarily. No verified evidence emerged showing that Alyssa successfully established a new life elsewhere. Years passed without confirmed sightings that investigators could authenticate. In many missing person cases, isolated reports continue to arrive for years, with individuals believing they may have encountered the missing person. Such tips are routinely investigated. Most ultimately prove inconclusive. Alyssa's case was no exception. Over time, investigators pursued numerous leads. None resolved the central mystery. The handwritten note remained one of the most debated pieces of evidence. Questions arose regarding its authenticity and significance. Did Alyssa write it herself? If she did, was it intended as a genuine declaration of plans to leave home? Or had it been written under entirely different circumstances? Publicly available evidence has never definitively answered those questions. Without additional corroborating evidence, investigators could not rely solely upon the note to explain her disappearance. Instead, they continued evaluating it alongside every other piece of available information. As the years progressed, attention increasingly shifted toward the broader family environment. Witnesses described household dynamics that investigators believed warranted closer examination. Friends recounted concerns they said Alyssa had shared regarding restrictions imposed at home. Those interviews encouraged detectives to revisit assumptions made during the early stages of the case. The disappearance no longer appeared to fit comfortably within the narrative of a teenager simply choosing to leave. Yet alternative explanations required evidence investigators still lacked. No confirmed crime scene had been identified. No forensic evidence conclusively established that violence had occurred. Most significantly, Alyssa herself remained missing. The absence of a body fundamentally altered the investigation. Without physical remains, investigators faced extraordinary legal and evidentiary obstacles. They could suspect. They could investigate. They could develop theories. But proving exactly what happened would require evidence capable of withstanding judicial scrutiny. That challenge would eventually define every subsequent stage of the case. Looking back, May 17th has become one of those dates examined almost minute by minute. Investigators reconstructed school records. They reviewed witness statements. They compared timelines repeatedly over the course of years. Every detail was scrutinized in the hope that one overlooked inconsistency might reveal what happened during the hours after Alyssa left school. Despite those efforts, the central question has never changed. What happened after Alyssa returned home? The answer remains unknown. That uncertainty distinguishes this case from many others. There is no confirmed account describing her final moments. There are no verified witnesses placing her at another location later that afternoon. Instead, investigators were left with a narrowing timeline that ended inside a private residence and expanded outward into decades of unanswered questions. For Alyssa's family, the disappearance marked the beginning of a painful uncertainty that would reshape their lives in dramatically different ways. For investigators, it became a case defined not by the evidence they possessed, but by the evidence they could never find. And for the public, May 17, 2001, remains the dividing line between an ordinary school day and one of Arizona's most enduring missing person mysteries. The disappearance itself would prove only the beginning. As detectives continued gathering statements, reviewing records, and re-examining the circumstances surrounding the family, the investigation slowly shifted away from the assumption of a runaway and toward far more troubling possibilities. That transformation would not happen overnight. It would take years, new investigators, and an unexpected development hundreds of miles away before the case entered an entirely new phase, one that would place the Turney household under closer scrutiny than ever before and fundamentally change the direction of the investigation. When investigators first became involved in the disappearance of Alyssa Marie Turney, they were not responding to a confirmed homicide. There was no reported assault, no discovered body, no identified crime scene, and no physical evidence immediately pointing toward violence. Instead, they were presented with circumstances that, at least initially, appeared consistent with something law enforcement agencies across the United States encounter every year: a teenager who might have chosen to leave home voluntarily. That initial impression would shape the investigation in ways that would later be examined repeatedly. The events reported to investigators centered on what Michael Turney said he found when he returned home during the evening of May 17, 2001. According to his account, Alyssa was gone. Inside the house, however, was something that appeared to explain her absence. A handwritten note had reportedly been left behind. The note suggested that Alyssa intended to leave for California because she could no longer tolerate life at home. Although the complete contents of the note have not been publicly released in full, investigators acknowledged that it conveyed the impression of a teenager voluntarily leaving her family. For responding officers, that note immediately became one of the most significant pieces of evidence. Missing person investigations often begin with very limited information. Detectives must rapidly determine whether they are dealing with an abduction, an accident, a voluntary disappearance, or circumstances pointing toward criminal activity. Every possibility carries different investigative priorities, and those priorities can influence how resources are deployed during the crucial first hours. In Alyssa's case, the existence of the note naturally encouraged investigators to consider the possibility that she had run away. That conclusion was not unusual. Across the United States, thousands of teenagers are reported missing each year, and many of those cases involve voluntary departures from home. Family disagreements, conflicts over rules, and a desire for independence can all contribute to young people leaving, sometimes only briefly. Law enforcement agencies therefore evaluate each report according to the evidence immediately available. At that moment, investigators had a handwritten note suggesting voluntary departure and no obvious indication that violence had occurred. Yet experienced investigators also understand that first impressions are not always accurate. As the initial interviews continued, detectives began gathering additional information intended to answer a simple question. Did the available evidence support the theory that Alyssa had intentionally disappeared? The more they examined the circumstances, the more complicated that question became. One of the first areas investigators considered involved Alyssa's belongings. Individuals who voluntarily leave home typically take items necessary for travel or daily living. The specific items vary from case to case, but detectives routinely ask whether clothing, identification, money, transportation, medication, or personal effects are missing. According to investigative records, several important items associated with Alyssa remained behind. Her vehicle had not disappeared. Her bank account still contained approximately $1,800. Personal belongings remained inside the home. Investigators also found no verified evidence that she had contacted friends after leaving. Each of these observations raised additional questions. None individually established that foul play had occurred. Collectively, however, they complicated the runaway explanation. Detectives also sought information from classmates, friends, relatives, and others who had interacted with Alyssa shortly before her disappearance. They asked whether she had spoken about leaving Phoenix, whether she had made travel arrangements, whether anyone expected to hear from her after school ended, whether she had expressed plans for California. No publicly documented evidence emerged showing that friends were aware of preparations consistent with a planned departure. Again, this did not conclusively disprove the possibility that she left voluntarily. Some individuals intentionally conceal such plans from everyone around them. Nevertheless, investigators recognized that the available evidence did not clearly support that conclusion either. The absence of communication after May 17 became particularly significant as time passed. Teenagers who leave home voluntarily sometimes eventually contact friends or relatives, even if only indirectly. In Alyssa's case, investigators found no confirmed communications establishing that she was alive after disappearing. No verified financial activity demonstrated that she had accessed her bank account. No confirmed records established that she had successfully relocated elsewhere. As days became weeks, concern continued to increase. The investigation expanded beyond the immediate family. Detectives followed tips received from members of the public. They compared reports of possible sightings. They entered Alyssa into missing person databases. As with many long-term investigations, leads emerged from various sources, but none provided definitive answers. Some reports appeared promising before ultimately proving inconclusive. Others simply could not be verified. The uncertainty surrounding every lead reflected the fundamental challenge investigators faced. Without knowing whether Alyssa had left voluntarily or become the victim of a crime, every possibility required consideration. At the same time, detectives continued interviewing those closest to her. Michael Turney cooperated with investigators during the early stages of the case and publicly maintained that Alyssa had chosen to leave. His account formed an important part of the initial timeline because he was the last known person to report seeing her. Investigators carefully documented his statements, as they would with any individual believed to have had significant contact with a missing person before the disappearance. Years later, investigators would revisit those statements as additional information became available. At the beginning of the investigation, however, detectives had limited reason to conclude that the case differed fundamentally from other reported teenage disappearances. That perspective gradually changed. As investigators gathered more witness interviews, they learned additional details about the household in which Alyssa had lived. Several friends and relatives described a family environment that they believed was unusually restrictive. Witnesses alleged that Michael exercised extensive control over Alyssa's activities and relationships. Those descriptions prompted detectives to examine the broader context surrounding the disappearance rather than focusing solely upon the handwritten note. Understanding family dynamics is often an important part of missing person investigations. Relationships can provide valuable context regarding potential motives, conflicts, or explanations for behavior observed before someone disappears. At the same time, investigators must distinguish between evidence suggesting interpersonal conflict and evidence establishing criminal conduct. The two are not necessarily the same. As months turned into years, the lack of progress became increasingly frustrating. The file remained open. Periodic reviews continued. New detectives occasionally revisited earlier assumptions. Each review involved asking the same fundamental questions. What facts were firmly established? Which conclusions depended upon assumptions? Had anything been overlooked during the earliest stages of the investigation? These reviews are common in long-term missing person cases. Fresh perspectives sometimes reveal investigative opportunities missed years earlier. Sometimes advances in technology provide new possibilities. Sometimes entirely new witnesses emerge. For Alyssa's case, however, the greatest challenge remained unchanged. There was still no confirmed evidence establishing what had happened after she returned home on May 17th. The passage of time also complicated the investigation in practical ways. Memories faded. Witnesses relocated. Physical evidence, if any had ever existed, became increasingly difficult to recover. Every year without answers reduced the likelihood that investigators would uncover decisive new information. Yet they continued. Missing person investigations rarely end simply because time has passed. Detectives understand that some of the most significant developments in cold cases occur many years after the original disappearance. The Alyssa Turney investigation would eventually prove no exception. Its most dramatic turning point would not occur during the first weeks or months after she vanished. Instead, it would arrive years later under circumstances few investigators could have anticipated. Before that breakthrough, however, another important realization emerged. The original runaway theory no longer satisfied every question raised by the evidence. Detectives increasingly viewed the disappearance through a different lens. Rather than asking only where Alyssa might have gone, they began asking whether she had ever left voluntarily at all. That shift did not provide immediate answers. It did, however, redirect the investigation toward entirely new possibilities. Those possibilities would eventually lead detectives to examine thousands of pages of documents, re-interview witnesses, and scrutinize Michael Turney's conduct with far greater intensity than ever before. The transformation from a presumed runaway investigation into a suspected homicide inquiry would take years to unfold. It would begin with an unexpected confession from a prison inmate hundreds of miles away, one that ultimately proved unreliable but nevertheless forced investigators to reopen the case with fresh eyes. That decision marked the beginning of the investigation's second chapter, a chapter that would uncover startling discoveries inside the Turney home and fundamentally change how authorities viewed one of Arizona's most enduring missing person cases. For nearly 5 years after Alyssa Marie Turney disappeared, the investigation moved with the frustrating rhythm familiar to many long-term missing person cases. Detectives continued receiving occasional tips, reports of possible sightings, and information from members of the public, yet none of those leads produced verifiable evidence explaining what had happened on May 17, 2001. The case remained open, but progress was limited. To investigators, one fact became increasingly difficult to ignore. No confirmed trace of Alyssa had surfaced. There were no verified financial transactions linked to her after her disappearance. No authenticated communications established that she had started a new life elsewhere. Friends who knew her reported that they never heard from her again. As the months became years, the original assumption that she had voluntarily left home appeared increasingly uncertain. Cold cases often evolve because of new technology, newly discovered evidence, or witnesses who decide to come forward after years of silence. Sometimes, however, an investigation changes direction because of an event no detective could reasonably predict. In 2006, that unexpected event arrived from more than 2,000 miles away. A Florida prison inmate named Thomas Heimer contacted authorities and claimed responsibility for Alyssa's disappearance. According to his confession, he had abducted and killed her years earlier. For investigators desperate to solve a case that had remained unresolved for half a decade, the confession demanded careful attention. Experienced detectives know that confessions cannot simply be accepted at face value. Every statement must be tested against independently verified facts. A credible confession should contain details known only to investigators or to the person responsible. It should accurately explain evidence that has never been released publicly. It should withstand careful scrutiny. Investigators therefore began examining Heimer's claims. They compared his account with the known timeline. They reviewed travel records and available evidence. They searched for information that could corroborate his statements. The deeper they looked, the less credible the confession became. Critical details failed to match established facts. Investigators concluded that Heimer's account could not be substantiated and ultimately determined that his confession was unreliable. False confessions from prison inmates are uncommon but not unprecedented. Some individuals seek attention. Others hope to negotiate perceived benefits or simply insert themselves into notorious investigations. Whatever Heimer's motivation may have been, investigators determined that his confession did not explain Alyssa's disappearance. Although the confession itself proved to be a dead end, it had an unexpected consequence. It forced detectives to reopen the case with fresh eyes. Rather than relying upon assumptions made years earlier, investigators began reviewing the entire file from the beginning. Cold case reviews often involve asking deceptively simple questions. What do we actually know? What have we merely assumed? Which conclusions were supported by evidence? Which were influenced by early impressions? Those questions became central to the renewed investigation. Detectives revisited witness interviews conducted years earlier. They examined timelines again. They compared statements for inconsistencies. They reviewed physical evidence collected during the original investigation. As they reconstructed the events surrounding May 17, detectives gradually shifted their focus away from the theory that Alyssa had voluntarily disappeared. That change did not happen because of one dramatic discovery. Instead, it resulted from the cumulative weight of numerous observations. The lack of confirmed contact after her disappearance. The belongings left behind. The absence of financial activity. The witness interviews describing the home environment. The inconsistencies investigators believed they had identified while reviewing earlier statements. None of these factors independently established that a crime had occurred. Taken together, however, they encouraged investigators to pursue a different line of inquiry. As part of that renewed investigation, detectives conducted additional interviews with people who had known Alyssa. Friends described a teenager they believed was living under unusually strict supervision. Several witnesses told investigators that Michael Turney closely monitored various aspects of Alyssa's life, including her relationships and daily activities. Those accounts aligned with information detectives were already reviewing concerning the family's internal dynamics. Investigators also examined statements Michael had made over the years regarding the day Alyssa disappeared. According to later court filings and investigative testimony, detectives believed portions of his account had changed over time or contained inconsistencies that warranted closer examination. It is important to note that identifying inconsistencies during interviews does not itself establish criminal responsibility. Memories change, people misspeak, and recollections often become less precise as years pass. Nevertheless, investigators considered those differences significant enough to continue their examination. The renewed inquiry gradually transformed the direction of the case. Rather than concentrating primarily on where Alyssa might have gone, detectives increasingly focused on what might have happened before she disappeared. That shift required examining the household itself. Investigators became interested in allegations describing extensive monitoring within the home. According to evidence later presented publicly, Michael maintained large collections of records concerning Alyssa's activities. Detectives viewed these materials as potentially relevant to understanding the family's relationships and the circumstances leading up to the disappearance. Years after Alyssa vanished, those concerns culminated in one of the most significant investigative actions in the entire case. In 2008, law enforcement officers executed a search warrant at Michael Turney's residence. What they discovered surprised even experienced investigators. According to court records and law enforcement reports, officers recovered more than 20 improvised explosive devices, numerous firearms, silencers, and documents describing plans related to explosive attacks. They also located thousands of pages of materials concerning Alyssa. These discoveries immediately shifted part of the investigation in an entirely different direction. The explosive devices formed the basis of a separate federal criminal case unrelated to proving what had happened to Alyssa. Michael Turney was later convicted in federal court for unlawfully possessing destructive devices and served a prison sentence for those offenses. Importantly, those convictions did not establish responsibility for Alyssa's disappearance. The investigations remained legally distinct. Even so, the search fundamentally altered public perception of the case. The discovery of weapons and explosive devices generated widespread media attention, introducing many people across the United States to Alyssa's story for the first time. For investigators, however, publicity was secondary. Their primary objective remained unchanged. They still needed evidence establishing what had happened on May 17, 2001. Despite years of investigation, that evidence remained elusive. No body had been recovered. No confirmed crime scene had been identified. No forensic evidence conclusively demonstrated that Alyssa had been killed. The case therefore entered one of the most challenging categories in criminal investigations, the suspected no-body homicide. Such cases are exceptionally difficult to prosecute. Without physical remains, investigators must rely heavily upon circumstantial evidence, witness testimony, timelines, behavioral patterns, and corroborating facts capable of persuading a jury beyond a reasonable doubt. Each missing piece of evidence increases the burden faced by prosecutors. Recognizing those challenges, detectives continued assembling information piece by piece. Every witness interview, every document, every timeline, every recovered record, every discrepancy they believed warranted explanation. Years continued to pass. Public attention gradually faded. For many unsolved cases, this is the stage where investigations quietly disappear from headlines and remain active only within police archives. Alyssa Turney's case might have followed that same path. Instead, an entirely different force emerged. It did not come from a detective. It did not come from newly discovered forensic evidence. It came from within the family itself. Sarah Turney, who had spent much of her life believing the explanation she had been given as a child, began reviewing investigative materials with fresh perspective. The more she learned about the case, the more determined she became to seek answers. Her decision to speak publicly would eventually bring unprecedented national attention to her sister's disappearance. Through social media, interviews, podcasts, and sustained public advocacy, Sarah transformed a fading cold case into one of the most widely discussed missing person investigations in the United States. That renewed public interest would place new pressure on investigators and prosecutors alike. After nearly 2 decades, the case was about to enter its most consequential chapter, a chapter that would ultimately lead to a murder indictment, a courtroom battle over circumstantial evidence, and a legal proceeding that tested the limits of what the criminal justice system can prove when the most important piece of evidence has never been found. Nearly 2 decades had passed since Alyssa Marie Turney disappeared. For investigators, the case had become one of countless cold files that remained technically active but painfully unresolved. Detectives had revisited witness statements, reviewed timelines, examined newly recovered evidence from the 2008 search of Michael Turney's home, and continued pursuing leads whenever they emerged. Yet despite years of work, the central question remained unanswered. Where was Alyssa? The absence of an answer weighed most heavily on those who had loved her. Cold cases often become quieter with time. News coverage fades. Witnesses move away. Public memory shifts toward newer tragedies. Families, however, do not experience that same passage of time. Every birthday, every holiday, and every anniversary becomes another reminder that someone is still missing. For Alyssa's younger sister, Sarah Turney, that reality eventually became impossible to ignore. As a child, Sarah had accepted the explanation that her older sister had run away. She had been young when Alyssa disappeared, and like many children, she trusted the account given by the adults responsible for raising her. For years, that explanation remained the framework through which she understood her family's history. Only later, after becoming an adult, did she begin examining the investigation for herself. Reviewing police records, investigative documents, and publicly available information exposed her to details she had not previously known. The process changed her understanding of the case and ultimately led her to publicly question the original narrative that Alyssa had voluntarily left home. Sarah decided that if the investigation was going to move forward, public attention would have to return to the case. She began using social media to tell Alyssa's story. She appeared in interviews. She participated in podcasts. She shared timelines and investigative information that had become publicly available. Rather than allowing the disappearance to remain an aging cold case known primarily within Arizona, Sarah introduced it to a national audience. Her efforts coincided with a period of rapidly growing public interest in long-form true crime. Podcasts, documentaries, and online communities devoted increasing attention to unsolved disappearances and cold cases. Audiences were becoming more familiar with complex investigations, particularly those involving missing persons whose cases had remained unresolved for decades. Alyssa's disappearance fit that pattern. A 17-year-old vanished. No body was ever found. The original assumption of a runaway had been questioned. The investigation had evolved over many years. A separate federal case involving explosives had drawn additional attention to the household. Most importantly, there were still no answers. The renewed public interest generated new media coverage across the United States. Journalists revisited the timeline. Investigative reporters examined the history of the case. Television programs and digital publications introduced Alyssa's disappearance to audiences who had never heard her name before. Public attention does not solve criminal investigations by itself. It can, however, encourage new witnesses to come forward, generate additional tips, and provide investigators with opportunities to revisit evidence that might otherwise receive little attention. Whether because of renewed public awareness, continuing investigative work, or the cumulative evidence assembled over many years, prosecutors eventually reached a significant decision. In August 2020, nearly 19 years after Alyssa disappeared, Michael Turney was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. The decision marked one of the most important moments in the history of the investigation. It also highlighted one of the greatest challenges in criminal law. This was a no-body homicide prosecution. Cases of this kind are relatively rare because prosecutors must attempt to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that a victim is dead and that the defendant is criminally responsible, despite the absence of physical remains establishing exactly how or where the death occurred. The prosecution's case relied primarily upon circumstantial evidence. According to court filings and later trial proceedings, prosecutors argued that the totality of the available evidence supported the conclusion that Alyssa had not voluntarily disappeared. They pointed to witness testimony concerning the family environment, inconsistencies investigators believed existed within earlier statements, and documentary evidence gathered during the investigation. The defense maintained that these circumstances did not establish murder beyond a reasonable doubt. Those competing interpretations would ultimately be tested in court. It is important to understand what the filing of criminal charges means within the American legal system. An indictment or arrest is not a determination of guilt. Rather, it reflects the prosecution's belief that sufficient evidence exists to present the case before a court. Every defendant remains presumed innocent unless proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. That principle would become especially significant as the case progressed. Public reaction to the arrest was immediate. For many people who had followed the investigation for years, the charges represented long-awaited progress. Others emphasized that the courtroom, not public opinion, would determine whether the available evidence satisfied the legal standard required for conviction. Meanwhile, investigators continued preparing what they believed was the strongest case possible. Witnesses were identified. Documents were organized. Years of investigative work were assembled into a narrative intended to explain why prosecutors believed Alyssa had been killed despite the absence of direct forensic proof. The defense prepared an equally vigorous response. Without a body, without DNA establishing homicide, and without a confirmed crime scene, they argued that the prosecution faced an extraordinarily difficult burden. Those legal questions would eventually become central to the trial. Outside the courtroom, Sarah Turney continued advocating for her sister. Throughout the renewed investigation and subsequent prosecution, she repeatedly emphasized that her objective was to keep attention focused on finding answers about what had happened to Alyssa. Regardless of differing opinions regarding the evidence, one fact remained unchanged. Alyssa herself had never been found. Her disappearance remained unresolved. The forthcoming trial therefore carried significance beyond the question of one defendant's criminal responsibility. It also represented an attempt by the justice system to address a mystery that had persisted for nearly 2 decades. Whether the available evidence would satisfy the demanding legal standard required for conviction remained uncertain. That uncertainty lay at the heart of every no-body homicide prosecution. Investigators may believe they have reconstructed the truth. Families may believe they know what happened. Public opinion may lean strongly in one direction. But criminal courts require proof. And proof must withstand rigorous legal scrutiny. As the case moved toward trial, years of investigative work would be tested before a judge. Every witness, every document, every inference, every assumption, everything prosecutors believed pointed toward homicide would be challenged under the rules of evidence. The outcome would ultimately demonstrate both the possibilities and the limitations of the criminal justice system when confronting one of its most difficult questions. How can a court determine what happened when the most important witness is missing, the victim has never been found, and the physical evidence needed to remove every reasonable doubt does not exist? That question would define the next and most consequential chapter of the Alyssa Turney case. Nearly 22 years had passed since Alyssa Marie Turney was last seen leaving Paradise Valley High School with her stepfather on the afternoon of May 17, 2001. More than 2 decades of interviews, investigative reviews, renewed media attention, and countless hours of detective work had led to a moment many believed might finally provide legal answers. For Alyssa's family, the approaching courtroom proceedings represented another chapter in a journey defined by uncertainty. For investigators, they marked the culmination of years spent assembling a case built almost entirely on circumstantial evidence. For prosecutors, they presented one of the most difficult challenges in criminal law, proving a homicide without a body. No-body homicide cases occupy a unique place within the justice system. American courts do not require the recovery of a victim's remains before a murder conviction can be obtained. Throughout history, prosecutors have successfully secured convictions in cases where overwhelming circumstantial evidence established both death and criminal responsibility. Those prosecutions, however, are exceptionally demanding. Every missing piece of direct evidence increases the importance of every remaining fact. In Alyssa Turney's case, prosecutors believed that the totality of the evidence justified bringing the matter before the court. The prosecution argued that Alyssa had not voluntarily disappeared. Instead, they contended that the available evidence, when viewed collectively, supported the conclusion that she had been killed inside the family home shortly after returning from school on May 17, 2001. To support that theory, prosecutors relied on witness testimony, investigative findings accumulated over many years, and evidence describing the relationship between Alyssa and Michael Turney. Witnesses described a household that several people believed was unusually restrictive. Friends recounted observations about Michael's extensive monitoring of Alyssa's activities and relationships. Investigators testified about the evolution of the case, explaining why the original runaway theory had gradually given way to a homicide investigation. The prosecution also highlighted what investigators viewed as inconsistencies in statements given during the years following Alyssa's disappearance. Rather than presenting one dramatic piece of forensic evidence, prosecutors asked the court to consider the combined weight of numerous circumstances. This approach reflected the reality of the investigation itself. There was no recovered body. No confirmed murder weapon. No identified crime scene supported by forensic evidence. No DNA proving that a homicide had occurred. Instead, the prosecution argued that the evidence formed a consistent pattern pointing toward one conclusion. The defense viewed the same evidence very differently. Defense attorneys reminded the court that suspicion, regardless of how strong it might appear, could never replace proof beyond a reasonable doubt. They argued that the prosecution had failed to establish one of the most fundamental elements of a murder case, reliable evidence demonstrating that Alyssa had, in fact, been killed. The defense emphasized the absence of physical evidence. No remains had ever been recovered. No forensic examination had identified a homicide scene. No scientific evidence directly connected Michael Turney to the alleged murder prosecutors described. They argued that while investigators had developed a theory, theories alone could not satisfy the legal standard required for conviction. Throughout criminal proceedings, the burden of proof rests entirely with the prosecution. Defendants are not required to prove their innocence. Instead, prosecutors must present evidence sufficient for a reasonable fact finder to conclude guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. That burden is intentionally demanding because criminal convictions carry profound consequences. The courtroom therefore became the place where years of investigation were measured against that legal standard. As the prosecution presented its case, the court heard testimony concerning the investigation's history, witness interviews, and the evidence detectives believed supported their conclusions. Each witness contributed another piece to the narrative prosecutors hoped would establish that Alyssa's disappearance could not reasonably be explained as a voluntary departure. When the prosecution completed its presentation of evidence, the proceedings reached one of the most significant moments in the case. The defense filed what Arizona law recognizes as a Rule 20 motion. Such a motion asks the judge to determine whether the prosecution has presented legally sufficient evidence to allow the case to continue. Importantly, the judge does not decide whether the defendant is guilty at this stage. Instead, the question is narrower. Has the prosecution introduced enough evidence that a reasonable jury could lawfully find guilt beyond a reasonable doubt? If the answer is no, the court must enter a judgment of acquittal without allowing the case to proceed further. This safeguard exists to prevent criminal convictions based upon legally insufficient evidence. After reviewing the prosecution's case, the judge granted the Rule 20 motion. The court concluded that the evidence presented was insufficient to allow the case to proceed to the jury. In practical terms, the ruling meant that the prosecution had not met the minimum legal threshold required to continue the trial. Michael Turney was acquitted of the murder charge. The ruling did not establish what happened to Alyssa. It did not determine that she had voluntarily disappeared. Nor did it resolve the many unanswered questions surrounding May 17, 2001. Instead, it reflected a narrower legal conclusion. Based on the evidence presented in court, the prosecution had not produced sufficient proof to support a murder conviction under the standards required by law. For many observers, that distinction proved difficult to understand. Public discussion often treats acquittal as synonymous with certainty. In reality, criminal courts answer only one specific question. Has guilt been proven beyond a reasonable doubt? If the answer is no, the defendant must be acquitted, regardless of lingering suspicions or unanswered questions. That principle lies at the heart of the American criminal justice system. It protects every defendant by ensuring that convictions rest upon evidence rather than speculation. The decision also carried another important legal consequence. Because Michael Turney was acquitted, the constitutional protection against double jeopardy prevents him from being tried again for the same murder charge based on the same alleged offense. As a result, the prosecution of Michael Turney came to a legal end in 2023. For investigators and for Alyssa's family, however, the disappearance itself remained unresolved. The criminal proceedings had concluded. The missing person investigation had not. No court ruling answered the central mystery that had persisted for more than 2 decades. Where was Alyssa? What happened after she left school on May 17, 2001? If she died, where were her remains? Those questions remained exactly as they had before the trial began. The courtroom had determined only that the available evidence was legally insufficient to convict. It had not determined the ultimate truth of what occurred that afternoon. For Sarah Turney, the conclusion of the criminal case represented another painful chapter rather than the end of the story. She continued speaking publicly about her sister's disappearance, emphasizing that regardless of the trial's outcome, Alyssa was still missing. The search for answers, she maintained, had not ended. From an investigative perspective, the Alyssa Turney case illustrates both the strengths and the limitations of modern criminal justice. Investigators spent years reviewing evidence, interviewing witnesses, and reconstructing events. Prosecutors brought the case before a court because they believed the accumulated evidence justified doing so. The judicial system then evaluated that evidence according to the rigorous standards established by law. Those standards are intentionally high. They exist because criminal convictions require more than probability. They require proof. When that proof is insufficient, acquittal is the legally required outcome. That principle protects not only defendants in difficult cases but the integrity of the justice system itself. Yet legal finality does not always bring emotional closure. For families of missing persons, unanswered questions often remain long after court proceedings conclude. Files stay open. Photographs remain on missing person registries. Investigators continue accepting tips. Hope, however uncertain, continues to exist alongside grief. By the time the courtroom doors closed in 2023, the legal chapter of the case had ended. The mystery had not. Alyssa Marie Turney remained listed as a missing person. Her disappearance continued to be one of Arizona's most enduring unsolved cases. And despite decades of investigation, national attention, and a criminal prosecution, the most important question of all still awaited an answer, one that no courtroom, no investigator, and no witness had yet been able to provide. When the courtroom proceedings ended in 2023, many observers expected the Alyssa Turney case to reach some form of conclusion. High-profile criminal trials often create the impression that a verdict will provide finality, offering a clear ending after years of uncertainty. In reality, the conclusion of the murder prosecution marked only the end of one legal chapter. It did not resolve the disappearance itself. Alyssa Marie Turney was still missing. No remains had been recovered. No confirmed location associated with her disappearance had been identified. No court had determined what happened to her after the afternoon of May 17, 2001. The distinction between a criminal prosecution and a missing person investigation became especially important after the acquittal. The court had answered only one legal question. Had the prosecution presented sufficient evidence to prove Michael Turney guilty beyond a reasonable doubt? The judge concluded that the answer was no. That ruling did not establish an alternative explanation for Alyssa's disappearance. It did not determine that she had voluntarily left home, nor did it identify another individual responsible. It simply reflected the legal conclusion that the available evidence did not satisfy the demanding burden required for a murder conviction. For investigators, the disappearance itself remained unresolved. Cold case detectives often describe unsolved investigations as unfinished conversations. Every interview, every report, every newly received tip becomes another piece of information added to a file that refuses to close. Although years may pass without significant developments, investigators continue reviewing evidence whenever new information becomes available. The Alyssa Turney investigation remains active in that sense. Law enforcement agencies have continued encouraging members of the public to provide information if they possess credible knowledge about the case. Even decades after a disappearance, investigators recognize that circumstances change. Relationships evolve. People who were once unwilling to speak sometimes reconsider. Memories may fade, but new perspectives occasionally encourage witnesses to come forward. Whether such information will ever emerge in Alyssa's case remains unknown. For her younger sister, Sarah Turney, the years following the criminal proceedings did not bring an end to public advocacy. Long before charges were filed, Sarah had transformed herself from a private family member into one of the most visible voices keeping attention focused on the investigation. Through interviews, podcasts, documentaries, and social media, she consistently reminded audiences that behind every legal debate stood a young woman who had vanished without explanation. Her efforts reflected a broader movement among families of missing persons. In previous decades, relatives often depended almost entirely upon traditional news organizations to publicize disappearances. Today, digital platforms allow families to communicate directly with millions of people. They can share photographs, timelines, investigative updates, and appeals for information without waiting for scheduled broadcasts or newspaper coverage. Sarah used those tools to ensure that Alyssa's name remained visible long after many cold cases had faded from public memory. That visibility matters. Missing person investigations frequently benefit from continued public awareness. Individuals who encounter age-progressed images, recognize forgotten details, or remember seemingly insignificant conversations sometimes contact investigators years after an event occurred. While many tips ultimately prove inconclusive, law enforcement agencies consistently encourage public participation because a single credible lead can fundamentally change an investigation. Whether renewed public awareness will eventually generate such a breakthrough in Alyssa's case remains uncertain. The disappearance has also become a subject of extensive discussion within the true crime community. Documentaries, investigative journalism, podcasts, and online forums have examined the available evidence, the legal proceedings, and the unanswered questions that continue to surround the case. Responsible coverage, however, requires an important balance. True crime storytelling seeks to explain complex investigations and preserve public awareness, but it must also distinguish carefully between established facts, investigative theories, witness recollections, and speculation. The Alyssa Turney case demonstrates why that distinction matters. The evidence assembled during the investigation prompted prosecutors to bring criminal charges. The court later concluded that the evidence presented was legally insufficient to support a conviction. Both statements are true. Neither statement fully explains what happened on May 17, 2001. That uncertainty continues to shape public discussion. Some observers focus primarily upon the legal outcome, emphasizing the importance of the presumption of innocence and the requirement that criminal guilt be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Others focus upon the unresolved disappearance itself, believing that important questions remain unanswered even though the prosecution did not result in a conviction. The legal system accommodates both realities. A person may be acquitted because the evidence fails to satisfy the constitutional standard for conviction, while an investigation into a disappearance continues because the underlying mystery has not been solved. Those two outcomes are not contradictory. They simply reflect different purposes. The courtroom determines criminal responsibility. Investigators seek factual truth. Sometimes those paths arrive at the same destination. Sometimes they do not. The Alyssa Turney case also illustrates the extraordinary difficulty of no-body homicide investigations. Throughout the United States, prosecutors have occasionally secured convictions without recovering a victim's remains. Those cases typically depend upon exceptionally strong circumstantial evidence supported by extensive corroboration. When such evidence is absent or incomplete, the burden of proof becomes extremely difficult to satisfy. The absence of physical remains affects nearly every aspect of an investigation. Without a body, forensic pathologists cannot determine the precise cause of death. Crime scene analysts may never identify where an offense occurred. Investigators cannot rely upon many forms of physical evidence that commonly appear in homicide prosecutions. Instead, they must reconstruct events using witness testimony, documentary evidence, timelines, behavioral observations, and whatever physical evidence exists. Each missing piece increases uncertainty. The Alyssa Turney investigation has therefore become an important case study for legal scholars, investigators, and journalists examining the strengths and limitations of circumstantial evidence in complex criminal cases. Beyond legal analysis, however, the disappearance remains deeply personal for those who knew Alyssa. Friends who attended school with her have continued living lives measured by graduations, careers, marriages, and families. Each passing milestone inevitably serves as a reminder that one classmate disappeared before reaching adulthood. For missing person families, time creates unusual emotional challenges. Hope and grief often coexist. The absence of definitive answers prevents many of the rituals that ordinarily accompany loss. There is no confirmed place of remembrance. There is no certainty regarding what happened. Instead, families often exist within a prolonged state of unanswered questions that can continue for decades. That reality helps explain why advocacy remains so important to many relatives of missing persons. Keeping a case visible is not simply about attracting media attention. It is about preserving the possibility that someone, somewhere, may possess information capable of changing the investigation. As of 2026, Alyssa Marie Turney continues to be listed as a missing person. Her disappearance remains officially unsolved. Law enforcement agencies continue to encourage anyone with credible information to contact investigators. Age-progressed images continue to remind the public what Alyssa might look like today had she survived. More than 25 years have now passed since the final confirmed sighting at Paradise Valley High School. The passage of time has changed many things. Technology has advanced. Investigative methods have improved. Generations of detectives have reviewed the case. Public awareness has expanded far beyond Arizona. Yet the central mystery remains remarkably unchanged. What happened after Alyssa left school on May 17, 2001? The answer has not been discovered. Perhaps it remains hidden within evidence not yet recognized. Perhaps it exists only in the memory of someone who has never spoken publicly. Or perhaps it has been lost to time in ways investigators may never fully overcome. Whatever the truth may be, the disappearance of Alyssa Turney continues to remind investigators, journalists, and the public that some of the most enduring mysteries are not sustained by dramatic revelations, but by the quiet persistence of unanswered questions. Until those questions are answered through credible evidence, Alyssa's story remains unfinished. It is not remembered because a mystery is entertaining. It is remembered because a 17-year-old girl disappeared, her family was forever changed, and the search for the truth continues. More than 2 decades after Alyssa Marie Turney disappeared, her case continues to be referenced by investigators, legal scholars, journalists, and advocates for missing persons, not because it reached a definitive conclusion, but because it illustrates some of the most difficult questions modern criminal investigations can face. How does an investigation proceed when there is no body? How does a prosecutor attempt to prove a homicide without forensic evidence establishing that a death occurred? How should investigators balance suspicion against the legal requirement for proof? These are not questions unique to the Turney case, but few investigations demonstrate their complexity as clearly. Every missing person investigation begins with uncertainty. At the moment someone is reported missing, investigators rarely know whether they are dealing with an accident, a voluntary disappearance, a medical emergency, an abduction, or a homicide. The first hours are often spent gathering basic facts while simultaneously making decisions that may influence the course of the investigation for years. Those early decisions are never made with the benefit of hindsight. Detectives work with the information available at the time. If a teenager leaves behind what appears to be a note indicating an intention to run away, investigators must consider that possibility. At the same time, they must remain prepared to adjust their conclusions if later evidence points in another direction. The Alyssa Turney investigation demonstrates how that process can evolve. Initial assumptions gradually changed as detectives accumulated additional information through interviews, document reviews, and renewed examinations of the evidence. The shift did not occur because of a single dramatic discovery. Instead, it reflected years of investigative work. Cold case detectives often describe investigations as puzzles assembled without knowing whether every piece still exists. Some pieces are obvious. Others are damaged by time. Some may never be recovered. The challenge lies in determining whether enough pieces remain to reveal the larger picture. In Alyssa's case, investigators spent years attempting to reconstruct events that occurred within only a few hours on May 17, 2001. Every interview sought to clarify those missing hours. Every witness statement added context. Every document contributed another fragment to the timeline. Yet one of the defining characteristics of the case remained unchanged. The absence of direct physical evidence. Without confirmed remains, investigators faced limitations that could not easily be overcome. Modern forensic science has transformed criminal investigations in remarkable ways. DNA analysis has solved cases once believed impossible to resolve. Digital records routinely establish timelines with extraordinary precision. Cellular data, surveillance footage, and electronic communications now provide investigators with sources of evidence that were either unavailable or far less developed in 2001. Technology, however, cannot create evidence that never existed or that has been permanently lost. It can only analyze what investigators are able to recover. That reality explains why many older missing person cases remain unsolved despite significant advances in forensic science. The Turney investigation also illustrates another important lesson. Circumstantial evidence can be powerful. Contrary to popular belief, criminal convictions are not limited to cases involving eyewitness testimony or direct forensic proof. Courts have long recognized that carefully assembled circumstantial evidence may establish guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. At the same time, circumstantial evidence must still satisfy rigorous legal standards. Each inference must be supported by reliable facts. Alternative explanations must be carefully considered. Speculation cannot substitute for proof. The 2023 court proceedings ultimately reflected those principles. The prosecution believed the available evidence justified a murder charge. The court concluded that the evidence presented did not satisfy the legal threshold necessary to proceed. Those two conclusions, although different, are both part of the history of the case. The legal outcome also serves as a reminder of one of the justice system's most fundamental protections. Every defendant is presumed innocent unless guilt is proven beyond a reasonable doubt. That principle sometimes produces outcomes that leave difficult questions unanswered. An acquittal does not necessarily explain what happened. Likewise, an unresolved disappearance does not relieve prosecutors of their burden to present legally sufficient evidence. The justice system deliberately accepts that tension because protecting against wrongful conviction is considered essential to the rule of law. For families of missing persons, however, legal principles do not erase emotional uncertainty. The conclusion of criminal proceedings rarely ends the search for answers. Instead, many families continue advocating for renewed investigations, additional forensic testing, and public awareness. Sarah Turney's advocacy has become one of the most visible examples of that commitment. Through interviews, documentaries, podcasts, and social media, she has consistently encouraged the public to remember that Alyssa's disappearance remains unresolved. Her work reflects a broader change in how missing person cases receive public attention. Years ago, families often depended almost entirely upon newspapers and television broadcasts. Today, digital platforms allow relatives to reach audiences across the world. A photograph shared online can be viewed by millions of people within hours. A documentary can introduce decades-old investigations to entirely new generations. Podcasts can explore complex timelines in ways traditional news coverage often cannot. These developments have changed the landscape of cold case investigations. Public attention does not guarantee answers. It does, however, increase the likelihood that forgotten witnesses, overlooked records, or previously unreported information may eventually reach investigators. Some of the most significant breakthroughs in cold cases have resulted from persistent public engagement years after the original investigation appeared to have stalled. Whether such a breakthrough will ever occur in Alyssa's case remains impossible to predict. Investigators continue encouraging anyone with credible information to come forward. The passage of time undoubtedly complicates that effort. Witness memories become less precise. Records disappear. Physical evidence may deteriorate. Yet history has repeatedly shown that the passage of decades does not necessarily prevent old mysteries from being solved. Across the United States, numerous cold cases have been resolved after 20, 30, or even 50 years through renewed investigative efforts, advances in forensic science, or information provided by individuals who finally decided to speak. Those examples continue to provide hope to families whose loved ones remain missing. As of 2026, Alyssa Marie Turney remains officially listed as a missing person. The investigation has not been closed. Law enforcement agencies continue to accept tips from the public. Her age-progressed images continue to circulate, reflecting what she might look like if she is still alive. Although investigators have pursued many leads over the years, no definitive evidence has answered the central questions surrounding her disappearance. For students of criminal justice, the case offers valuable insight into investigative methodology, evidentiary standards, and the challenges of prosecuting no-body homicides. For journalists, it demonstrates the importance of distinguishing verified facts from speculation. For the public, it serves as a reminder that some of the most enduring mysteries are not maintained by sensational revelations but by the absence of definitive answers. Most importantly, for those who knew Alyssa personally, the case has never been an academic exercise. It has always been about one young woman whose future disappeared on an ordinary afternoon in May. Everything that followed, the investigation, the media coverage, the renewed attention, the courtroom proceedings, and the continuing public discussion, began with a 17-year-old who left school and was never seen again in any confirmed public setting. That reality remains unchanged. The questions remain. The investigation remains open. And somewhere beyond the legal proceedings, media attention, and years of public debate lies the truth of what happened after May 17, 2001. Whether that truth will ever be discovered is something no investigator, journalist, or court can honestly promise. Until credible evidence provides a definitive answer, Alyssa Turney's disappearance will remain one of Arizona's most enduring unresolved missing person cases, a reminder that justice is not measured only by convictions, but also by the continuing determination to seek the truth, wherever it may ultimately lead.